Thanks for joining us. This is live with Miami's Community News, and our guest today is, I'm going to try to get this right, Boris Go ahead, tell us.
Boris Leonidovich Zhadanovskiy,
Okay.
But I always say Boris is fine.
Okay, Boris is fine. There we go. The new name for the day. So you're an attorney, all right? And tell us a little bit of your background about, number one, why you decided on law, why you decided on the firm that you're with, and why we're going to be here today.
So last time I was in the studio, I briefly spoke about my upbringing and the reasoning I really wanted to get into law. And really it boils down to the law is almost like a different language for people. There's statute, there are rules, there's common law, there's federal law, there's preemption. And most people don't have to deal with it until something goes wrong. So I wanted to help be an interpreter for people on this foreign language. And really it felt right when I started to get into pre-law during my undergraduate education. My undergraduate education is in business administration. And then I started going to healthcare administration. Then I started dealing with codified issues and statutes, and you have to understand them. I graduated from Florida State.
Okay.
And I took several pre-law courses that they offered, and I said, wow, this is exactly where I want to be. And I had all the plans of getting my MBA, and just like that, my path changed just with those courses. And instead of sitting for the MBA, I sat for the LSAT, and I ended up going to Wake Forest University to get my law degree. But during that process at Florida State, I joined the Florida State cycling team, and it's a club team. It's not a varsity sport, so we paid for everything out of pocket, and we traveled on our own money. But I really got into the cycling community in Tallahassee, and we're here to talk about cycling law.
Yes, and you bring up an interesting point. Most people don't have any connection to the law. We just go about our lives and we do it, and then all of a sudden something happens. And a lot of people's experience in vehicles and bicycles is not a good one. It's typically not a friendly relationship that exists, because the bicyclists are to your right or to your left.
Mm-hmm.
They're usually within 10 feet of your vehicle, and you better watch out if you make a right-hand turn. One of the complaints that we hear frequently is the cyclists typically do not comply with the traffic regulations that are there. And it's confusing because when we see the cyclists go across the street when it's red light, but then we're supposed to act like we're a vehicle and they are. So tell us about the laws, how they're supposed to behave on roads.
So you bring up a very good point, and a point of frustration that cuts both ways. First of all, as you mentioned, as a driver, as a vehicle operator, you see cyclists not follow the rules. And sometimes drivers take it out on cyclists, and they drive too close on purpose, or they don't follow the rules. They don't let a cyclist merge when he's trying to make a left turn. So the rules are there, generally speaking, the road rules are there, generally speaking, so that everyone on the road can be predictable, because a predictable rider or a predictable driver is safe, because somebody else can act accordingly. If a car blows through a stop sign, that's unpredictable because you expected that car to stop. The same thing with a cyclist. So going back to what is a cyclist supposed to do? Well, the general answer is very simple. If they're on the road, if the bicyclist is on the road, for all intents and purposes, they are considered a vehicle, such as a car or a motorcycle. They are supposed to be following exactly the same rules that a car would be following. They're supposed to stop at a stop sign. They're supposed to stop at a red light. When entering an intersection, they're supposed to yield to the right of way if there's another car coming in the opposite direction.
So one of the things we've seen recently, meaning the last 10 years, that counties and cities have been making bicycle paths.
Mm-hmm.
And when particularly it's near our office here, it's about 5 blocks long, And then on the side, they actually not just put a green entranceway for the bicycle, they put a little curb, which is like, it's very defining, and it's a delight to see that, so that we know what lane we're supposed to be in. Don't go any closer than that side that's over there. And so it's easier for us to understand that. I think that one of the county ordinances, they have to take into consideration future bicycle paths. So now, if somebody runs into if there's a collision between the cyclist and the vehicle, the guy's going to get hurt, right? And sometimes really bad. There were some cases on the I think it's still called the William Powell Bridge on the way to Key Biscayne, where there'd been some real tragedies over there. So, how does the law protect one or the other as far as legal recourse?
So that is an interesting question, and you treat it as you would a automotive collision, because they are both, for all intents and purposes, under the law, cars. So it would all depend on the factual circumstances of how the collision occurred. The issue with bicycle cases, and in my experience, there's no small injuries when a bicycle crash occurs. All right, the cyclists are not protected by all of the safety features and all of the safety mechanisms that a driver of a vehicle would be. There's no airbag. There's no safety belt. You're higher up off the ground if you're riding a race-style road bicycle. When you go down, there's going to be significant injury. Potentially, in my experience, I've seen traumatic brain injuries from bicycle accidents, probably in higher chances of receiving those types of serious injuries in a bicycle versus a car-on-car collision, even though, as we all know, as we've all seen, car accidents can be equally catastrophic. So it would depend on who's at fault and the liability associated therewith. If the bicyclist runs a stop sign and the car didn't have a stop sign, then just as you would with two vehicles impacting each other, the bicyclist would be at fault for that incident. Now, the good part for the driver is more than likely the driver of the vehicle is not going to sustain any serious physical injury.
It's certainly emotional for everybody, without regard to whose fault. And I know somebody that was at a stop sign in a truck, looked both ways, and then he takes off. Right as he's starting, a bicyclist runs into the wheel well. Bang, like a 14-year-old kid. Fortunately, didn't get hurt, but it was only seconds away from being really, really hurt. You mentioned about brain trauma. What is the state law concerning helmets and bicycles?
It depends on how old the rider is. All right, there's a specific statute dealing with helmets, and they're required for individuals that are of a certain age. And the statute there's one state statute that has codified bicycle laws. And it's a fairly short read. I always recommend people read that statute. It's filled with a bunch of legalese, but you can still get some little bits of information that are interesting to find out. And that statute is 316.2065 of the Florida statutes, publicly available to anyone who has the internet, or they can probably get a copy at the library if they really wish. I would strongly recommend helmets to everyone, whether the law requires it or not. Again, going back to the magnitude of the injuries that you're likely to receive if something goes wrong, a helmet is worth its weight in gold.
You know, it's interesting that most of the bicyclists that I see wear helmets, but yet there are many state laws concerning motorcycles to where it's an option. Is that still the case?
Off the top of my head, I do not remember. I know at one time it was mandatory. Motorcycle helmets were mandatory in the state of Florida. There were changes to that legislature due to lobbying of certain interest groups, which again makes to me no sense. Because again, I'm a strong proponent of every safety feature that you can possibly have, but that's part and parcel, I think, of my profession, because we see what happens when things go wrong. No one comes to us saying, I had a great day today.
So I just can't imagine the guy doesn't wear a helmet, but he goes out and buys very expensive shoes to make sure the shoes are
Of course.
correct, very expensive clothing to whatever the function is of that, uh, and flashing lights and maybe even something on their shirt that flashes, all right? And then not to wear a helmet seems sort of sad, especially for the family, that this whoever it is might hurt themselves.
Well, thankfully, in the groups, and both my wife and I still cycle to this day. We do weekend groups and weekday groups. In the groups that we participate in, it's mandatory. The groups do not want a liability on their hands of allowing someone without a helmet to ride in their group because, as they say, God forbid something happens. My wife and I have helmets for every occasion, for mountain biking, for road biking, for gravel biking, different ones, because it's different comfort levels. You're doing different activities.
Plus, it's a lot of fun. So I understand that bike sales in the last 15 months have skyrocketed. Can we talk about that, why that is, and what's the future of cyclists here in South Florida?
Well, I would be speculating,
of course.
But bike sales have absolutely skyrocketed to the point that most manufacturers, in my experience, and I bought a bike within the last couple of months, and I had a huge difficulty finding something that's in stock, that's not on back order, that doesn't have an 8-month waiting list. Wow. Which, if you told me that 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't believe you. Again, I'd be speculating, but I believe that part of the huge sale in bicycles is partly due to COVID. People are staying at home. People now, instead of driving to work or driving to the office or where have you, they're spending their leisurely time more outdoors, potentially buying bicycles for their kids, going on bike rides, biking to local coffee shops, which I think is a great change. And I think, as you mentioned, the cities going forward with initiatives, I think the bicycling industry right now, with how hot it is helping the city, showing the city that it's making a right choice, that it's a very popular activity.
And you bring up a very good concept, which is cities and county government is also saying, let's change the zoning near metro rail stations so people can live there. They can either walk or take their bike with them. And we see that, and over many, many years, it's starting to take effect. We see it here in South Miami, in Pinecrest, and in Palmetto Bay. And so there are lots of bike clubs. All right. Shout out to former Mayor Gene Flynn, Palmetto Bay, who every weekend he subjects all of us to his Google ride, 20, 30 miles, 40 miles. He shows us the whole thing. Congratulations. Bring back some fruit from Roberts, will you, please? So when you go out on your cycling, typically, is it a scenic route you take? Is there a specific destination that you want, or is it typically just we're going to go out for 20 miles or 30 or 40, whatever it happens to be?
It depends, and those people that cycle like it's their job will know what I'm alluding to. It depends on what next activity you're planning to do. So if you have a big race coming up, that's a endurance race where you're supposed to ride 230 miles in 3 days or something along those lines. I've done 100 miles in one day. That was the maximum that I ever want to do. And it was actually the Miami Grand Fondo in, I believe 2015 or 2014. It was 100 miles, Coral Gables, started at the Miami City Hall and did one of the hottest days of the year, in my opinion.
So how many turns is that? Have you ever figured out how many per mile that is?
Well, you could do a calculation. Most cyclists that participate on any sort of competitive level have what's called a cadence meter.
Yes. Which
measures how many rotations per minute of the crank they're doing. So if you figure out how long the ride was and what your average cadence was, you could probably figure out exactly how many rotations you had.
So how's that on your joints, your hip, your knees, your ankles? How's that work?
It's better than most other endurance sports. They say, and I'm likely going to have people disagree with me, But running is one of the most impact-heavy sports. It's bad on your knees. It's bad on your hips. A lot of runners have difficulties later in life with the joints. Exactly. Point proven.
Ouch.
Cycling is less impact.
Yes.
I would, even though I'm not a swimmer, I would probably think that swimming is even better on your joints, yes. And it's a full body workout. Same thing with rowing or sports like that. So cycling, I think, ranks a little bit better on your joints than running, but likely not better than swimming.
Sometimes when we observe a lot of people on a bicycle, it's very impressive. 20, 30, 40, 50 bikes going down the street. It's really cool. It just, if I'm walking by, I just stop and absorb that. What is it like to be in a big group after an hour of cycling? What do you go through, your feelings and physically? What is that like?
It depends on what stage of the ride it is. If it's at the end and you just finished a sprint and you can barely breathe, it's not great. But that feeling of being in a peloton, being surrounded by other riders, generally the riders are 6 to 10 inches away from each other, and one false move causes those catastrophic injuries that we were talking about. You can imagine if somebody towards the front goes down, most of the people behind them are going to go down with varying degree of serious injuries. And if you go on YouTube or Google Tour de France, I don't think there's a year that goes by without a very serious crash and without very serious injuries. So it's really it's an adrenaline-filled sport. You're going 25, 30 miles per hour without any sort of real protection other than a helmet, wearing, Lycra, which is not as rash resistant as motorcycle leathers.
So have you crashed before?
Of course.
So what is that like in the couple seconds from the time you go, oops, this is about to happen? Because what is that like? What do you go through?
Well, I'll give you a very specific example because I still remember it like yesterday. We're riding on US 1 in West Palm Beach, and I heard something fall off my bike. It was a night ride, or it was getting dark, and I have a rear light like you'd have on a car, blinking red light so that people can see that there's a bicyclist in their lane and hopefully avoid you. I heard it rattle off, and I looked back for a split second to see what that noise was.
And you're going forward at 15, 20 miles an hour?
15 to 25 miles an hour. In retrospect, that wasn't a good decision. I should have just let bygones be bygones and let whatever it was go. Turn back for a split second. By the time I look back up, I'm veering towards the curb, because as you know, where your head is pointed, that's where your body is going to go. That's the old adage. So I'm veering towards the curb, and everything goes, as they say, in slow motion. It was extremely controlled. I couldn't do anything to stop it. I hit the curb at about 25 miles per hour, and I just slid across it. The Lycra pants that I was wearing had a huge hole from my hip to my knee, and I couldn't sleep on that side for maybe a month or two. But other than that, I was lucky just to have a bit of fairly severe road rash.
So, and when those things it's spontaneous that you would hear something, you look back, just like if you heard a plane or a gunshot, you would go look in that direction. So it was only a couple seconds from the time you turned around until you're already on the curb.
An instant. That felt like an eternity, because I knew it was happening. As soon as I looked back, I saw the curb. If I would have made a aggressive turn to the left, I would be in traffic. So there was really just go down and slide.
The great thing about marathon is most of us run so slow, we don't have to worry about that.
If you go down, you're not getting road rash.
So let's talk about where you're not supposed to ride your bicycle, all right? What about in shopping centers or in sidewalks and things like that?
So cyclists are interesting. As we discussed in the very beginning, when they're on the road, they're a vehicle just as a car or a motorcycle. But a lot of people wouldn't expect a car to be on a sidewalk. You'd turn your head and you say something's terribly wrong. However, we see bicycles on the sidewalk every single day, and
Yes.
no one bats an eye. Why is that? Well, the statute that governs bicycles allows them to be on a sidewalk. And when they're on the sidewalk, just as when they're on the road, they're a car, when they're on the sidewalk, they're considered a pedestrian. So it's two hats. They're equally allowed to be on the sidewalk, but when they're on the sidewalk, they have to follow all the rules that a pedestrian would follow, plus one very interesting one that I actually didn't know till I got into the legal profession, but I had always practiced as a cyclist, is if you're on the sidewalk and there's somebody walking in front of you with their back turned, you yell on your left, or you give them some sort of verbal warning that you're about to overtake them. I had always done it just as a common courtesy, but that is actually codified that you have to give a pedestrian a verbal cue that you're about to pass them as a cyclist on a sidewalk or as a bicyclist on a sidewalk.
Let's talk about if you're walking down the sidewalk and a cyclist is coming your way, and in any environment you have to make a decision. You can be on the right side of that other person, and the cyclist on the left side. So what I usually do, I just step into the grass because I don't want to have this conversation about I'm going over here or going over there. But what should, if it's going straight on, you're just going that way and somebody's walking towards you, what's an appropriate thing again for the cyclist to do?
Just as you would on the road, don't take up the whole sidewalk. Move as far to the right as practicable. And we're going to chat a little bit about that when we start talking about positioning on the road when the bicycle is a vehicle. Where are they supposed to be? Because they're not supposed to be on the left side. But when we're talking about a sidewalk, be reasonable for both the pedestrian and the cyclist, and be predictable. All right. If you're walking and you hear on your left, don't jump to the left. The safest thing that a pedestrian can do is be predictable, keep walking as they were. Or if they hear on the left and they're, in the middle, maybe take a step to the right. Or, and not many people want to do this, go to the grass. I mean, that will be the safest area for the pedestrian. But again, this is not about one person has, control of the whole sidewalk just because they're on the bike. That's not the way that it should be.
And in the running community, that's one of the things we do when we're running behind somebody. I usually say, please don't stop suddenly, all right? Or say, I'm on your left, whatever. And so there's this courtesy that you find that's common. But let's talk about as you mentioned, the cyclists are going down the road. You're in the right lane, there's 2 lanes going that way. And so the cyclist is sometimes so far to the right, and then we try to pass them on the left, leaving only about this much space, all right? Where should they be so that we as a vehicle driver do not have to be concerned that we're going to hit their left handlebars?
This is likely one of the most difficult questions to answer without saying it depends. And in the law, it depends is one of the most common things that you have to say, because every rule has its exceptions. The way the statute is written leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And the statute says that if there is no bike lane, which most roads do not have a dedicated bike lane. Most people think when they have one white line and then another white line, a couple feet next to it, that's a bike lane. That's not a bike lane. That second white line just differentiates the end of the paved road. A designated bike lane has the little bicycle emblem on the road. That is a dedicated bike lane. You see those very rarely unless the city has some sort of efforts to install more bike lanes and make it more bike safely. But old roads are not going to have that. In that instance, when there is no dedicated bike lane, the statute says the bicyclist must be as close to the right side of the road as practicable. Doesn't mean as far to the right side as possible, meaning that as far to the right side as is safe for the cyclist. The hypothetical that you present, it deals with a fairly narrow road. When there's not enough room for cyclists to be as far to the right as practicable and still have enough room for a car to pass, which is called an extra wide lane, which again are very rare, the cyclist has control of the whole lane, or should have control of the whole lane. And in certain circumstances, it may not be safe for the cyclist to be as far to the right as practicable because he's going to have people try to pass him too closely. In a situation like that, it may be the safer call for the cyclist to be further to the middle to actually tell the drivers,
hey,
it is not safe to pass me at this particular moment. And as frustrating as that is to drivers, because again, I'm a driver as well. I drive all the time. I drove down here from West Palm Beach. Now, the interstate doesn't have any bicycles. They're not permitted to. But on the side roads around the office, I'm sure it's not rare to see bicyclists. And the roads here are fairly narrow. So I would not be surprised to see a bicycle taking up the whole lane to make sure that vehicles are not trying to squeeze by him and endanger him.
I actually think that is a better thing. And as you're saying, it's predictable. He's there. He's making a statement. I'm here. All right. All right. I'm not going to go to the right anymore because you're going to try to pass me on the left. So as far as liability, without regard to whose fault it is, the one with the insurance, all right, the insurance companies frequently settle to make it go away. Or even if you're 100% not at fault, all right, the guy runs, there's a collision there because the insurance companies settle for what reasons?
Well, that is a whole other topic, but generally speaking, insurance companies do an analysis of what the potential likelihood of success for any plaintiff is versus what the injuries are. So I'll give you a very easy example. If somebody on a bicycle may have ran a stop sign but was killed as a result, and there's only a $10,000 policy, it would be difficult for an insurance carrier to not say, well, maybe we could be 5% at fault and the damages are well over above our limits even in that situation, so we should just tender the policy limits.
And it's easier. So, but sometimes the consumer, the insured, got a couple minutes left, says, I don't want you to do it. But the insurance company says, no, we're going to do what works. There's a case many years ago. There were a group of newsstands, there were about 20 that were lined up. Guy on a motorcycle runs the avenue. All right. The driver was over here, and there was a collision out there. The position of the cyclist family was he couldn't see the oncoming traffic, even though he ran it. And in this case, there were about 20 newsstands. We were the farthest away, and their expert even said they were not at fault. There was nothing about obstruction of view, but they paid. Right? That's just the way that works.
In most circumstances, that's the way that works. There are what are called consent policies where the insurer actually has to get permission from their insured in order to take any action, but those are extraordinarily rare when it comes to automotive policies, and likely similarly rare when it comes to premise liability policies, because I'm presuming that was a general business liability policy.
Yes. Yep. So, Boris, so we know when there's a collision without whose fault it is, there's going to be injuries, little or a lot. There's going to be financial remuneration somewhere. So my humble advice, and I'm not a lawyer, is just keep your distance from these guys because nobody wants anybody to be hurt. And again, when I see bicyclists on my right side, I drive a truck, I make sure I go 2 blocks in front of them. Right, because I don't want to be making that right turn and they're going to wind up running right into the side. Oh my goodness! So we want all the cyclists to be careful and to wear helmets and whatever other equipment, and for the people that are driving vehicles to honor them, understand that they are, when they're in the street, they're like another vehicle, right? And if the cyclists are on the right hand side of the road, that they're not going to go too far over if they're going to hurt themselves. And so, and bicycling is going to be more and more popular as it becomes more and more accepted. And there are so many bicycles out there from all over. And my hat's off to you for continuing your cycling adventures. And it certainly is safer than running. We're going to wrap this up. So is there another subject that you wanted to bring up concerning cyclists?
Well, I want to add to what you just said. I think the respect, the honor, and the safety have to go both ways. This is not a one-sided, unreciprocal relationship. Just because the cyclist is more at danger to get seriously injured shouldn't mean that he is able to run the stop sign. He's able to stop the red light. And as a cyclist myself, I see that my fellow cyclists do that on a regular basis. And it has to cut both ways. Even though it's extremely beneficial to take the viewpoint that you described, that you should give them extra space. I mean, 5 feet, 7 feet, 10 feet, whatever it takes, just as you would another vehicle, right? You wouldn't be 2 feet away from another vehicle because you might get your paint scratched. Well, in this case, you might seriously injure someone. Keep the frustration in check. Everyone has busy days, and most of those cyclists that you see on the road are also drivers. They're also, mothers, sisters, family members, and we want to keep the drivers safe. We want to keep the cyclists safe. And I do want to give a shout out, if I may.
Yes.
There is a nonprofit organization in the state of Florida called floridabike.org, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we can get a banner for them at some point, that do a phenomenal job of explaining the statutes that we talk about today, as well as many others. They have photographs, they have guides, they have recommendations, videos for both drivers that want to just be a little bit more educated on cycling safety, but as well as riders that need to be more educated on cycling safety.
So maybe one day, maybe the school system up yonder, right, will say, "Hey, we're back in action," and maybe in the physical ed departments or the general discussion, to have experts like yourself to go and talk to them about bicycle safety, because a lot of kids nowadays are riding their bikes everywhere. So when you made a decision to get your MBA when you were younger, and although you changed, at what point did you put in your head, I'm going to go get a graduate degree? How old were you when that sort of set in?
Well, the MBA would have been the graduate track, so to say, and I feel like I always knew that. Again, my initial inclination was to go into this medical administration field and help people that need healthcare needs, that need the doctors, the nurses, but need somebody behind the scenes to make sure that everything's orchestrated. And when I got into that process, then I realized, why not go a step further? Why not go into the legal field? And I meet with clients on a daily basis that are having quite possibly the worst day of their life. They just lost a loved one. They just sustained a serious injury. They've been greatly and unjustly hurt and injured. And I'm able to sit with them, to counsel them through, this one snapshot in time, and then to be a lifelong counselor, lifelong advisor, and hopefully help them get back on their feet and see that process, be a part of that process.
Yeah, it's interesting, the connection between healthcare and what you do and how you interpret that. So my hat's off to you with that. The name of your law firm is Searcy,
Denny, Scarola, Barnhart, and Schindler.
We got all of that. All right. And what's your website is searcylaw.com?
Searcylaw.com, SEARCYLAW.com, and you can find a lot of our information on that website, as well as some blog posts regarding bicycle safety, boating safety, pool safety. I mean, we do any number of personal injury matters, but we do specialize in representing those that have been injured due to the negligence of others. We do not represent the insurance companies. We do not represent the businesses. The only thing that the attorneys at my law practice do, with the exception of one or two who do some contract law, is represent the injured victims.
That's great. Continued success to you and your colleagues at your firm. And thanks for being here. And we're going to wrap it up. Howard, thanks so much for doing the show, folks. CirceLaw.com. You can find them all over, everywhere. All right, check them out and give Boris a call. I'm sure Boris is fine. All right, can take care of you. Again, thanks for joining us.